and welcome everyone to the PMO Virtual Summit. We have Khawaja from New York City. Hi Salah, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. Thanks for taking the time out from your busy schedule to participate in the PMO Virtual Summit. I really appreciate it.
Hey, I'm very excited to be here. Looking forward to it.
Great. Salah, I know you're going to be talking to us about PowerPoint and change management, how to quickly come up with wizard-like PowerPoint decks and create an amazing experience for your stakeholders and whoever you're presenting to, and also talk through about change management. I know I've used a lot of your materials for my PowerPoint presentations, and they've helped me a ton, not only in just terms of getting the presentations together quickly, but also in terms of ideating how to structure some materials. So that's amazing things out there. Salah, before you get into it, if you could just give us a quick overview on you and then get us right through it.
Thank you, Hussein, for having me. So I'm here to talk about how you can use PowerPoint for effective change management. Want to make great presentations fast? Well, give me 45 minutes, and that's what you're going to be able to do. What I will ask you all to do is close Outlook, close IM, put your phone on airplane mode, give me the next 45 minutes of focused attention, and I will make you a PowerPoint god, and I will help you use PowerPoint for effective change management. And basically hit home runs. So let's get into it with a little bit of background. Let's start with the simple question, what is the point of communicating? Well, it's simple. It's to make a point. 10 billion presentations are created every year. Many of them are really, 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 really bad. Think about the large decks that you have seen and how they drone on and on and on. We also live in an attention span challenged world. Information overloaded one as well, with 52 trillion emails being sent every year. So information is power only when it's understandable. So if you put all of those things together, attention span challenged world, information overloaded world, how information isn't always understandable, the bottom line is that insights are not getting out. And I can help you with changing that. So let's start with design thinking. And the starting point on that is basically, we are visual creatures. 83% of retention occurs visually. So if information is worth sharing, then shouldn't it be worth designing? So let's think about design thinking. It starts with discovering, inspiration, identifying opportunity, which leads into defining, where you empathize with the problem, you understand it, you observe it. Then it moves into developing, thinking about how you can prototype, how you can execute, how you can build, and how you can then eventually lead into delivering. And a lot of this is not sequential, it's an iterative process. So if you think about design thinking and presentations, it's all about the viewer. And this is something that we can easily forget. You have to keep the viewer in mind. And we'll discuss this a little later in the presentation. So starting off with the viewer, it's basically starting off with answering 4 questions around the viewer. Who, what, why, and how. Who are you solving for? What are their needs? Why it matters to them? And how you'll solve it. So then let's talk about the rules. So if you think about rule number 1, is if you think about the result, what do you do? If you think about how a computer company makes computers, that's what they do. Then you think about the process. We cobble together great technology for the computer company, and that's how we do it. And why do we do it? Because computers make your life easier. Now, this is just your typical, computer company. But what if you were Apple? how would you do it? They've inverted it. So they start with the why. We believe in challenging the status quo and doing things differently. Then they talk about the process, how our products are beautifully designed and are easy to use. And oh, by the way, the result is we make computers. So how do you apply this to PowerPoint presentations? You have to start with the why. Why are you even creating the presentation? Really think about that. And then you're thinking about the process and how you're solving it and focus on how you solve it. And then the result is your call to action. If you kind of put all of this together, it really starts with the why, and why is the hook. So what is the hook for your presentation? And if you go back to the point around the viewer, which is also one of the rules that we'll cover in a bit, is that think about how you're going to hook the viewer, and you're going to take that person on a journey. So that's rule number one. Rule number two is around simplicity. Bottom line is simple can be harder than complex. You have to work harder to get your thinking clean. But in the end, it's worth it because you can move mountains. Who said this? Steve Jobs. And this is why he created the remote control on the left and not the one on the right. So simplicity is needed to convey an idea. And the goal of simplicity is focus. Emphasize the insightful and remove the distractful. There might be many, many things in your head that you want to actually convey to the viewer, but think about those ideas that are really insightful and focus on conveying those versus everything that's there. And so that's where there's this balance between simplicity and powerful, and that tension that you have to kind of navigate through, and finding the right balance is key. And it's an ongoing, continuous, iterative process where you organize and you eliminate and you collect information, and you're constantly reducing the complexity and focusing on simplicity. Another way to think about it is like chiseling away and building a sculpture. So rule number two is keep it simple. Moving on to the next one, people like stories. Stories reshape information into meaning. Stories are more likely to be shared. So how does this apply to PowerPoint? And that's where storyboarding comes in. Storyboarding is the method for the creation of a storyline of a deck. A great storyline has an engaging beginning, an insightful content, and a clear conclusion. It is easier for the audience to understand complex concepts when explained in a storyline. The storyboard process converts brilliant abstract ideas into a coherent storyline. Think about the storyline of this deck so far. Started off with the title. I have a section, one on background, section two on design thinking, and now I jumped into rules. So this is my story. So when you're thinking about the deck that you're writing or you're building, think about the story. Here's a simple standard story for most corporate presentations. You have a title page, you have an executive summary, you have a body, you have next steps, and appendix. And more I'm seeing how most decks shouldn't be more than 10 pages. Just use that as a rule of thumb, put all the details in the appendix. And the whole goal is to take people on a journey and basically tell a story. And that's rule number three. Moving on, remember design thinking and the importance of the viewer, who the viewer is. Well, knowing your audience is rule number four. Really understanding who they are, what they're interested in. Because they're not interested in everything that's in your head. They're just interested in what they're interested in. So create a deck with that in mind so that you can basically remove, again, all the distractful stuff, everything that's in your head, and just focusing on the bit that your audience is particularly interested in. And that's rule number four. So rule number five is why reinvent the wheel? And that's where you can copy, steal, and paste from my time saver. Over the years, I've collected the best of my slides and put them into a time saver so that it saves me time. Before, I used to go fishing around looking for that slide that I was thinking about leveraging and I could never find it. So I was like, let me save some time. Let me put them all together and create the time saver. And here are some key slides that always come in handy. The executive summary slide, a simple option analysis slide where you can compare different options, chevrons to show a process, a status report to show the status of a project, a timeline in the form of a Gantt chart to show the different phases of a project, a maturity model to kind of share where you were, where you are today, and where you're headed. A simple pyramid. You can't have a deck without a pyramid. And then just another, basic circle where you can kind of break things up. And this is my PowerPoint time saver that Hussein will be also sharing with you as part of the conference. And the key is to kind of pin the time saver right at the top of your PowerPoint so it's always there and it's always handy. So rule number 5 is leverage the library. So thinking about slides, you have to focus on directing the eyes of the viewer. The slide flow should be apparent in a flash. Determine a focal point, then create a visual path, establish a hierarchy, create uncluttered slide layout, structure in a balanced way. So basically you're guiding the eyes of the viewer. And then choose your colors wisely. I'm just showing you Facebook's colors here. Pick your brand, pick, the colors that are your corporate colors or your company's colors, and use those in your PowerPoint. And then you want to use visuals, going back to the principle that if information is worth sharing, isn't it worth designing? So here's a simple example of visual of a process flow: supplier, input, process, output, customer. And then, sometimes we have a tendency to really cram things in, and going back to that rule of keeping it simple, white space is your friend. This is all white space here. This is an example of a bad slide. Do not create this. Less is more. And if you put all of these together, the visuals, directing the eyes, keeping it simple from a white space perspective, less is more. You put all of these together and you get rule number 6, where you're trying to make it sing. Rule number 7, bullets are evil. Bullets are bad. Do not use bullets. This is a slide that nobody wants to see. Boxes are good. Sometimes you have to have just a few thoughts, just put them in boxes. How long does this take? It takes minutes, not even that. And sometimes you can kind of layer in details. You can have the title and you can have some details below it. This is so much nicer than having bullets and sub-bullets and blah, 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 where you can convey information visually. So rule number 7 is don't use bullets. Conclusion: have a hook, keep it simple, tell a story, know your audience, leverage a library, make it sing, and then don't use bullets. So if you put all these rules together and you follow these rules, you will make amazing decks. All right, so now let's talk about change management. And here's an approach for on-time, high-quality benefit realization that I have built over a 20-year career between my effort at Deloitte and Fortune 500 financial services firms, and subsequently at a couple of banks. So let's talk about why change management is important. The scale of change is increasing, massive business transformation efforts are underway, and there's ineffective change management in place today. And as a result, many technology projects fail. So there is a business imperative to have strong change management, strong PMOs manage many of the projects. So there are 8 change management components to a streamlined approach for on-time, high-quality benefit realization, starting with the portfolio view. And this is a simple way for executives and managers to understand all of their projects divided up into key categories. Each project has a red, amber, green status and a trending status. And your eyes automatically go towards the red and ambers, so you understand where those projects are and how well they're doing. And you can kind of double click into the reds and you can look at a status report. And here's this template for a simple status report. You could name the initiative right here. You can have the business owner, the tech owner, the overall status. the current status summary, the completed milestones that are in flight, and then you can also give a little bit of background on the project. So then you have to put in strong governance. You have to have status meetings, steering teams, and that's where a handy dandy pyramid comes in to explain this. You have a portfolio view that you can share with executives, and then you have a program view with the middle layer of management, and then you have the project milestones with the folks in the trenches. And then you can build a strategic roadmap of all of the programs, and that you can actually plaster on a large wall to basically see how programs are in flight and how when they come together, the transformation is actually happening. And then the fifth component is basically financial management. You have to understand your financials from an overall budget perspective, understanding the actuals, what have you already spent, what's the forecast, and the variance. So the sixth component is basically risk management, where you're trying to identify blockers to progress and success. So you have to have a process in place to detect, assess, respond, and monitor project risks. And what you want to do is you want to identify the higher likely risks and the higher impact risks and really focus on those. And here's a simple template where you can capture project risks and share those with management and executives. The seventh is basically having a communication plan to ensure continuous engagement with key stakeholders. So you can have stakeholders across over here, and you've got different channels, status reports, newsletters, websites. And so you want to make sure that you have a formal communication plan around the project success so that you can continuously engage the various stakeholders. Component number 8 is change control. Things change. So how do you ensure that basically changes are incorporated and addressed from a change control perspective? And you have governance around the change control side of things. And here's a simple template that you can use to capture changes and make sure that you're understanding the impact. So basically, if you think about these 8 components, if you've implemented them, you will get on time, high quality benefit realization. Where the money your organization is spending, you're actually getting the benefits from that money. So then if you think about PowerPoint and this, all of this comes together. Everything I just did and showed you was on PowerPoint. That is the de facto mode of communicating in companies and large corporations. So my perspective is, how do you then become a PowerPoint god and make great PowerPoint presentations and then bring them into change management? So Sin, that was my kind of the talk, linking PowerPoint into change management. I really thank you for the opportunity to share all the lessons I've learned and how I've kind of codified this into streamlined methodologies. And again, thank you for the opportunity.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Salah, for being here. This was amazing. Really, really appreciate it. So Salah, obviously going through all of these, a lot of context here, great transition from PowerPoint to change management. And I'm sure our listeners and our viewers will certainly have some questions. So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. The first question that I had was this interesting article that I came across where it said that the CEO of Google doesn't use bullets. He just uses images, right? And I've seen a lot of people using the style of not even using various structures that were provided in the templates. I know that I personally use a mix. I sometimes in certain presentations use all the structures that you provided, as well as sometimes I just use images with a couple of words, etc. Which approach would you say is more powerful in what situation?
I mean, I think it's effectively it's knowing your audience. If you have an audience and the purpose of the deliverable is, a massive keynote speech, if you will, then it should be less words, a lot of imagery. And if your deliverable is a consulting-like deliverable and you're doing a deep assessment, then you have to go deep. And I think you have the full spectrum, right? Ideally, you don't want to make it like all bullet, like I was talking about from a role perspective. So you want to be, if this is the full spectrum, you want to be more here and between here. So highly, highly visual or, wordy, but not too wordy. So that's kind of how you want to calibrate based on understanding the problem and knowing your audience.
That makes a lot of sense. One other thing that I also come across quite often is the number of limited attention span that people have, especially when you're presenting in front of executives, right? They have 40 million things going on. If you don't get their attention immediately, they're on, their phone, they're twiddling around, they're waiting for people to get to the point. How can PMO leaders or even project managers who are watching this make an immediate impact with their audience? What is it can they do? Is it something like, whatever the reveal is, do the big reveal immediately and then talk about the why, or build an anticipation? What are some of the suggestions that you might have for that?
I think you can go any way. You can do the reveal and then build it back up, or you can just build it and end up with the reveal. I don't think one is right and one is wrong. It doesn't really matter. I think the key thing to understand is that you have to repeat yourself, and you have to repeat yourself multiple times over multiple months. People who are listening are focused on what they're focused on, and they might be half listening, not half listening. So you need to over communicate, and you have to repeat the communication. And every time you go back, do a little bit of a level set that, hey, this is the background, this is what we talked about before, very quickly, and then kind of building off of that. But reinforce the messages over and over and over again. And when people have heard it for a few times, that's when they truly get it. And even then you have people that don't get it. So don't underestimate the time that it will take to communicate and to over communicate, and just reinforcing the messages over and over and over again. And using, summary formats, right? Like at the end of a meeting, sending an email saying, hey, this is what we discussed. Here are the 3 or 4 things. Boom, boom, boom. Not detailed, but just boom, boom, boom. And getting them on board on those, and then building off of that.
That makes a lot of sense. One final thing, Salah, which is when we talk about change management, communication is such a key, and I think you sort of drew the connection there for us. And I often see that instead of just conveying the message, the mode or the medium of the communication is also equally effective. So for instance, if I created this beautiful deck, right, and I flip that over to an executive via email, I really can't expect that person to have gone through it, or even if they did go through it, to really understand it. Maybe if you can, provide your perspectives on modes or mediums of communication, depending on the executive stakeholders, teams, etc. What would be the most effective for PMO leaders?
And I think the first is, keep your deck under 10 pages, ideally 6 or 7 pages. That's number one. Do not make it content heavy. Number two. Number three, and this is something that, I hold myself to that bar, my team to that bar, which is if I send that deck to someone and someone opens it in their inbox, will they be able to understand the deck without a voiceover? And if the deck meets that bar, then it's a good deck. And if it doesn't, then it's a bad deck. So you have to continuously think about that bar. And just, I tell my team, right, pretend you have amnesia and look at your deck. You don't have any background and you're reading this deck for the first time. It's hard because you got to kind of get rid of that knowledge and suddenly look at that deck in a brand new way. And then you think about, okay, I'm looking at it for the first time. Am I understanding it without a voiceover? And if it passes that bar, you did it. Otherwise, go back to the drawing board and keep drawing.
I know that can be very, very tough because, usually it's not like you have all the time in the world. You have certain timelines to meet. These requirements for creating the presentations on top of other things that you have to do. And oftentimes in the environments that you've come from, Salah, and I know I've been there in my past life as well, you have multiple presentations happening at multiple times on a recurring basis. So it can be extremely stressful, but practice makes perfect. And as you get into it, then you get the rhythm and get it flowing. So, and sometimes when I found that in consulting engagements, when I moved from client to client, I had to learn the audience again. I had to learn about what they want, how they like it, how they, consume information. But if you have a longer engagement, or if you're working within the industry, then you get to understand who your audience is, and then once you've got that, then you go for it, right? Then when they see the materials coming from you, they can spot that material and say, oh yeah, you know what, that deck came from Salah or his team, right? And
Yeah,
that's the biggest compliment that you can get.
absolutely.
Salah, thanks so much once again for taking out the time. Really, really appreciate you being here, talking us through how to become PowerPoint gods and how to train your team if you don't have the time with the PMO leader to become PowerPoint or Keynote or whatever presentation format that you have, because that is extremely important. We all know that it's one of the most popular mediums of communicating, and when you're doing this, no matter what you have, like what you see in the screen, portfolio status, governance, financial management, change control, as a PMO leader, you need to address all of these, and these are effective ways of communication. So thank you for being with us for this and taking us through this, Salah.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And for all our listeners and viewers, Salah, once again, is the founder of Declaration, which is a company that focuses on building PowerPoint decks, websites, blogs, etc. You can learn more about him, his team, and the work that they've done at declaration.com. That's DECKLARATION.com. Thanks once again for being here at the PMO Virtual Summit.
My
Bye-bye.
pleasure. Thank you, Sam. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.